rain hammered the windows of my Richmond home like fists demanding entry as I pressed my palm against the cold glass, watching water streak down in jagged lines that looked like the tears I couldn't shed anymore. Behind me, in the living room I'd shared with Harold for 43 years, the air felt heavy and stagnant, and the silence was so loud it was almost deafening. Now, standing in my bedroom doorway, I stared at the lock, a shiny, new brass deadbolt that had been installed on the outside of my door. My sister Justina had installed it yesterday. According to her, she had done it for my safety, she had said, patting my hand with that condescending smile that didn't reach her eyes, and claiming something about sleepwalking. She said I'd been wandering at night, confused and dangerous to myself, but to the best of my knowledge, I hadn't sleepwalked since I was 9 years old, living in our parents' house in Tulsa. Justina had come to Richmond for something, but I was beginning to realize it wasn't grief support. The truth, hidden in a folder I hadn't found yet, would shatter everything I thought I knew about my husband's death, and it would force me to question every single interaction we had shared over the last 6 months. But Justina was here now. She and her daughter Paige were now 24 days into their temporary stay to help me cope with widowhood, and I was beginning to feel less like a sister and more like a prisoner in my own home. I'm 68 years old. I buried my husband on a Tuesday in Richmond under a gray Virginia sky that refused to clear, and by Thursday, I opened my home to my sister and her daughter because family helps family. That's what my late husband, Harold, would have wanted, or so I thought. I had no idea that while I was mourning the love of my life, Justina was already measuring the square footage of my living room and calculating the liquidation value of my grief. Now, let's go back to that funeral reception. To understand how I ended up locked in my room, you have to understand the funeral reception. It had been strange, almost surreal. Neighbors I'd known for decades suddenly treated me like fragile china, speaking slowly and loudly as if grief had stolen my hearing along with my husband. Mrs. Kowalski from next door actually asked Justina how I was managing, while I stood right there, holding a plate of untouched casserole. Justina answered for me, her voice smooth and authoritative, telling Mrs. Kowalski that I was still confused, and that the doctor said it was normal at my age. I frowned, because I'd never been to a doctor, at least not recently, and certainly not for confusion. Mrs. Kowalski's eyes held something else I couldn't name then. Pity? Fear? Or perhaps someone had already gotten to her before I arrived. That night, after everyone had left and the house smelled of lilies and stale coffee, Justina took my house keys from the ceramic bowl by the door. She said she'd hold on to them, given how forgetful I'd become lately. My stomach had tightened with a primal warning I ignored because you don't suspect your own blood. Not yet. But now, in the darkness of my bedroom, I tested the door and it held fast, locked from the outside. Through the floorboards, I heard the murmur of Paige's voice. She wasn't whispering. Why would she? To them, I was just a confused old woman who was probably already knocked out by the sleeping pills Justina had tried to give me earlier. She's totally out of it, Paige laughed, the sound vibrating through the wood. Mom says we can list the house by the 1st of the month. Yeah, the appraisal is done. She won't even know she's moving until the van pulls up. My breath caught in my throat. List the house? I pressed my ear closer, hoping to hear more, but Paige's voice had faded, replaced by Justina's low laugh, a sound I hadn't heard since we were girls, when she'd steal my favorite doll and hide it just to watch me cry. Suddenly, I was transported back to the summer of 1957 in our backyard. I remembered 9-year-old me, clutching a worn teddy bear and searching frantically under the porch while 12-year-old Justina sat on the swing, dangling the bear by one arm and saying, "Want it back? Beg." Even then, her eyes held that cold spark, control disguised as play. Our mother called it teasing, But I should have called it what it was: rehearsal. Morning arrived with sunlight and the smell of burnt toast. My bedroom door stood open, unlocked as if it had never been secured at all. I dressed quickly, my hands trembling as I buttoned my cardigan, and descended the stairs to find Justina at the kitchen table, flipping through a checkbook, my checkbook. She glanced up briefly and mentioned casually that my debit card wasn't working anymore. She'd tried it at the pharmacy yesterday to pick up my prescriptions, she said. She had also gone ahead to call the bank and they would get it sorted. My throat felt tight, but before I could protest, Justina interrupted with that patient smile. Age does funny things to memory, Becky, she said, as if she were younger than me, even though she was 3 years older. But it wasn't just the money. It was the nights. It started with small things that made me question my sanity. I would leave my reading glasses on the nightstand before bed and find them in the freezer the next morning. I would put my tea down on the coaster, turn around to answer the phone, and it would be gone, only for Justina to find it later in the bathroom sink, and her looking at me with that pitying smile. "Oh, Becky," she'd coo, touching my forehead. "You're so tired and you're getting confused again. Maybe you should lie down." But the worst was the scratching. 3 nights after the funeral, I woke up to the sound of metal on glass. Scritch, scritch, and scritch. It was coming from the guest room window down the hall. I got up, my heart hammering against my ribs, and checked the room, but there was nothing there. The next night, it was louder, and voices, whispering my name from the hallway. "Becky, Becky, open the door." I ran to Justina's room, terrified, bursting through her door. She was sitting up in bed, reading a magazine, looking perfectly calm and unbothered. "Did you hear that?" I gasped, clutching my robe. "Someone is in the house." "Hear what, darling?" she asked, not even marking her page. "The house is silent. You're having another nightmare. Dr. Morrison said this would happen." "I don't know a Dr. Morrison," I cried. "Shh, go back to bed," she soothed. "I'll give you one of the pills he prescribed. It will help the voices stop." I started to doubt my own ears and my own mind. That is how they break you. Not with a hammer, but with a whisper. They move the world just an inch to the left until you fall over trying to find your balance. The next morning, Paige breezed into the kitchen with a yoga mat under one arm and a green smoothie in hand. She'd redecorated the living room overnight without asking me. Harold's fishing trophies were gone, and his comfortable reading chair had been replaced with some modern monstrosity in gray velvet. The walls, once covered in family photos, now displayed abstract art, which Paige claimed was cleansing the energy. They were erasing him. Piece by piece, and I was just standing there, watching it happen. I felt my husband evaporating from his own home, but what stopped my heart was the empty space above the fireplace. Harold's urn. It was gone. I asked where it was, my voice barely a whisper because I was afraid of the answer. Paige glanced up from her phone, bored, and said she'd moved it to the garage because it was depressing to look at every day. My husband. In the garage, like a broken lawnmower. Something inside me cracked. It wasn't a break, it was a shift. I walked to the garage without another word, pushing past the boxes they had packed without my permission, and found Harold's urn shoved on a metal shelf between paint cans and old motor oil. My hands shook as I lifted it, cradling the cool metal against my chest and apologizing to him under my breath. When I came back inside, Justina had blocked the entrance to the living room, saying gently that maybe it was time to let go, that keeping Harold's remains in the house wasn't healthy, and that there were services that could adequately handle the ashes. Handle them. Like trash. I pushed past her, placed the urn back on the mantel, and told her if she ever touched it again, I'd call the police. Justina's smile never faltered. Instead, she reminded me that I didn't have a phone anymore, that the landline had also been disconnected because I had been making confused calls in the middle of the night, calling 911, claiming intruders, and none of it real. The police have already been here twice, Becky, she said softly, and they think you are suffering from grief-induced delusions. I really didn't know where she was going with this, but one thing I knew was that I'd never called 911 recently. But who builds a lie this detailed unless they've been planning it for a while? What I didn't realize in that moment was that those 911 calls, the ones I never made, had been documented and stacked like bricks, building a cage around me. I tried the bank that afternoon. I just walked out the back door while Justina was in the shower and made it 3 blocks down the tree-lined street before Paige's car pulled up beside me. She asked where I thought I was going, rolling down the window. I didn't answer. I just kept walking, my purse clutched tight to my side. She drove slowly alongside me, telling me that Aunt Justina was worried sick, that I shouldn't be out alone, and that Dr. Morrison had prescribed medication for my confusion. But I just kept refusing to take it. I walked faster, my heart pounding, until I reached the branch of First National on Broad Street. At the bank, the teller, a young woman named Brittany who I had known for years, looked genuinely sorry when she explained that my account had been modified. A co-signer had been added, Justina Parker, and any withdrawals over $500 now required both signatures. I insisted I'd never authorized that. Brittany turned her computer screen toward me, and there was my signature. Perfect. Dated 5 days after Harold's funeral. The day I'd spent 16 hours in bed, unable to move, and drowning in grief so thick I couldn't breathe. The day Justina had brought me soup I didn't eat, and pills she said would help me sleep. I'd taken them because she was my sister, and I trusted her. I'd woken up 20 hours later with gaps in my memory, and Justina sitting by my bed, stroking my hair like I was a child. 20 hours. What else happened in those 20 hours? I asked Brittany for copies of everything. She hesitated, then printed them. 3 documents: power of attorney, joint account access, and something that made my blood turn to ice, a beneficiary change form. If anything were to happen to me, everything would go to Justina Parker. Not my children, Charlotte in Seattle or Benjamin in London, but to my elder sister, Justina. I asked when this was signed. Brittany checked. 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, I'd been fully conscious. I'd been here in this bank, withdrawing cash for groceries. I'd spoken to Brittany, asked about her new baby, but I hadn't signed anything. I told her this was fraud, that someone was stealing my life. Brittany's expression shifted into that awful mixture of pity and discomfort. She gently suggested that maybe I should talk to my doctor about the memory issues, that these were stressful times, and that grief could do strange things. Justina must have been there, forging my signature right in front of them with whatever fake documents she'd prepared. How long had she been planning this? Months or years? I stumbled outside, gripping the brick wall as my vision tunneled. A hand touched my shoulder. I spun around, ready to fight. It was Jane, my friend Jane, 71 years old, and carrying grocery bags, her face creased with concern. She said I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I collapsed against her, the words pouring out in fragments, the locked door, the forged signatures, Harold's urn in the garage, and Justina moving through my life like a plague, taking everything, piece by piece. No one believes me, I sobbed. She's built this perfect story of a confused old woman losing her mind. Jane dropped her grocery bags right there on the sidewalk, with the sound of glass jars clinking and tomato sauce splattering the concrete. She pulled me to her car and told me we were going to the police station, right away. When everything's crashing down, you need one person who believes you. Just one. Without that, you're not surviving this. But Paige's car was already there, idling across the street, watching. Jane saw her too, and her jaw tightened. She told me to get in her car anyway. I did. Paige followed us all the way to the Richmond Police Department and parked right behind us, got out when we got out, and walked in when we walked in, And the officer at the desk listened to my story with growing skepticism and asked if I had proof. I showed him the bank documents, told him to check the signatures, and to look at my account history to see that something was wrong. The officer said he'd need to verify the information and asked me to wait. Paige stood in the corner, texting and smiling slightly. 10 minutes later, the officer returned with a printout. He said he'd pulled up my file and that there'd been 2 wellness checks at my address in the past 3 weeks. Both times, I'd called 911 claiming intruders, and both times, officers had found no evidence of break-ins. My sister had explained that I was struggling with grief and confusion. The officers had filed reports recommending a mental health evaluation. I told him I'd never called 911, that this was exactly what I was trying to explain, that Justina was manipulating everything. The officer asked Paige to step forward and inquired if she was family. Paige introduced herself as my niece and that she was staying with me to help care for me after my husband's death. She claimed I'd been having episodes, paranoia, false memories, accusations, and they were trying to get me help, but I kept refusing treatment. The officer looked at me with that expression I was learning to hate, that gentle condescension reserved for the confused elderly. He suggested I work with my family, that they were trying to help. Jane tried to intervene. She said she'd known me for 40 years, that I was sharp as ever, and that something was clearly wrong. But the officer was already done with us. He had other calls to handle, real emergencies. We had to leave. In the parking lot, Paige approached Jane and said she appreciated her concern, but that family matters should stay within the family. She claimed that getting me worked up with conspiracy theories wasn't helping my condition. Jane told her exactly where she could shove her concern. Paige's smile vanished. She said if Jane continued to interfere, they'd have to file a restraining order, that I was vulnerable and needed protection from people who took advantage of confused seniors. The threat hung in the air like something poisonous. Jane drove me home in silence. When we pulled up to my house, she gripped my hand hard and told me she believed me, that she'd figure something out. But right now, I needed to be smart. Play along and don't provoke them. I asked how I was supposed to live in my own house as a prisoner. She didn't have an answer. That night, they didn't lock my bedroom door. They didn't need to. Where was I going to go? Who was going to believe me? I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, and for the first time since Harold died, I wished I died with him because at least we'd be together, and I wouldn't be trapped in this nightmare where my own blood was hunting me. The fear was palpable, suffocating me like a heavy blanket, and I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the image of Harold's urn sitting on a garage shelf between cans of paint thinner. And that's when I heard it. Voices downstairs. Justina and Paige were arguing in the kitchen. I crept to the heating vent and pressed my ear against the cold metal grate, holding my breath. Paige sounded angry, her voice sharp and impatient. She said the police report was perfect, but Jane had become a problem because that old woman likely knew too much and was asking too many questions, so they needed to move faster. "What do you suggest?" Justina asked, her voice calm and measured, the voice of a general surveying a battlefield. "Stop waiting for her to cooperate," Paige hissed. "Just call the county tomorrow and request an emergency psychiatric hold. We have the 911 calls on record, and we have Dr. Morrison's documentation. It will be easy. She'll be committed for 72 hours minimum, long enough for us to clean out the accounts and get the house appraised." My heart stopped. Committed. They were going to lock me away. That seems extreme. Justina hesitated, though I could tell she was considering it. Paige laughed, a cold, brittle sound that chilled me to the bone. "Don't get soft now, Mom. This was your idea in the first place. You were the one who came to me 6 months ago with this plan. You told me that Aunt Becky was sitting on $400,000 in assets and no one would miss an old widow who barely talked to her own kids. 6 months ago, even before Harold died. So this plan had been in motion even while he was still alive? They hadn't just waited for him to die. They'd been circling like vultures, planning the feast before the body was even cold. Justina's voice dropped so low I could barely hear her. Fine, we'll make the call tomorrow morning. But you have to handle it, Paige. You have to make it look like concern, not malice. If the social worker suspects anything... That's easy, Paige said. I've been practicing concern my whole life. Then they laughed, both of them, like this was funny. Like I was just a math problem to be solved. I backed away from the boards, my whole body shaking so hard my teeth chattered. Tomorrow morning. They were planning to have me committed tomorrow morning. I had one night, just one night to save my own life. At that moment, I remembered 2019 in Harold's hospital room in Dallas at 3 a.m. The machines were beeping softly, and I was holding his hand while he slept, recovering from surgery. I'd been there for 6 days straight and hadn't left except to use the bathroom. A nurse had brought me blankets and told me I needed to go home and rest, but I'd refused, telling her that my place was right there by Harold. Harold had woken up briefly and squeezed my hand. He asked if I'd eaten. I lied and said yes, but he knew I was lying. You are stubborn as hell, Becky, he had whispered, his voice rough with sleep. And I love you for it. I kissed his forehead and told him I'd learned from the best. That stubbornness had kept him alive through 3 heart surgeries and 2 rounds of pneumonia. That stubbornness had held our family together when money ran out and hope ran thin. That stubbornness had built the life we'd lived in this house for 43 years. And that same stubbornness was going to get me out of this. Or I'd die trying. I searched my bedroom, every drawer and every corner, but I found nothing useful. They'd cleaned out anything that could help me. No phone charger, no scissors, and no keys. But they'd missed something. Under the loose floorboard beneath my dresser, the one Harold had never gotten around to fixing despite promising to do it every Saturday for 20 years, I found his old emergency toolbox. It was small, rusty, and filled with odds and ends, but there, nestled among the loose screws, was a flathead screwdriver. I worked on the window frame in the darkness. The nails Justina had driven through my window sashes to prevent me from escaping were old, and the wood was soft from years of Virginia humidity. It took almost an hour of silent and careful work, with my hands cramping and my breathing shallow, but I finally got one side loose. Then the other. The window opened with a soft creak, and cold night air rushed in, smelling of wet leaves and freedom. I stood back and stared at the open square. Possibility. I could run. Right now, climb out, drop the 8 feet to the bushes below, and run until I found someone who'd listen. But where? The police didn't believe me. The bank thought I was confused. My own children were an ocean away, convinced Justina was helping. I needed proof. Real proof. The kind that couldn't be explained away as dementia. I climbed back into my room, left the window cracked, took the screwdriver, and went downstairs. The house was dark and silent. Justina and Paige were asleep. I moved through rooms I'd lived in for decades, like a ghost haunting her own life, and I went to Harold's study, Justina's room now. The door was closed but not locked. Inside on the desk, illuminated by the moonlight filtering through the blinds, I found it. A folder labeled B. Hastings Estate Planning. My hands shook as I opened it. Forged documents, powers of attorney, living wills, property transfers, all with my signature. All perfect forgeries, some dated weeks ago, some dated yesterday. And underneath, a handwritten note in Justina's writing. Once committed, trigger dementia diagnosis, and full guardianship within 60 days. Sell the house by July and split 60-40. 60-40. She wasn't even splitting it evenly with Paige, her own daughter. But there was something else in that folder, something wedged at the bottom, a pharmacy receipt. And when I saw the date, my world stopped turning. A receipt from a pharmacy in Richmond, dated 3 months before Harold died, for medications I didn't recognize, prescribed by Dr. Morrison. The same Dr. Morrison who'd never treated me and whose signature was on all those forged documents. My hands started shaking so hard I nearly dropped everything. Because suddenly, horribly, I understood. I took the entire folder, tucked it under my nightgown against my skin, and walked back upstairs as quietly as I'd come down. Back in my room, I knew nowhere in the house was safe, so I locked the door, lifted my shirt, and using the medical tape from the bathroom kit, I secured the flat packet of papers against the small of my back. It was uncomfortable, and the crinkle of paper terrified me, but it was the only way to ensure that wherever I went, the evidence went too. Then I climbed out the window. The drop was more complicated than I expected. I landed wrong, twisting my ankle on a tree root, and pain shot up my leg like lightning. But I didn't scream. I didn't make a sound. I just limped through my backyard, through Mrs. Kowalski's yard, and 3 houses down to Jane's place, each step a struggle against the pain and the fear of being caught. I knocked on her back door at 4:30 in the morning. She opened it while still in her bathrobe, her hair wild and her eyes wide with shock. "Becky? They're going to commit me," I whispered, leaning against the doorframe. "In a few hours. I have proof, Jane. I have everything." Jane didn't hesitate. She pulled me inside, locked the door, made coffee, and called someone. A woman answered on the second ring. I could hear her voice through the phone, professional and alert despite the early hour. Jane explained the situation in rapid-fire detail. The woman on the phone asked questions, and then Jane handed me the receiver. "This is Natalie Woods," the woman said. "I'm an elder law attorney in Denver, but I handle cases across state lines. Jane contacted me 2 days ago with concerns, but this is urgent." I told her everything, my voice trembling with fear and anger. The locks, the forgeries, the plan to commit me, and the folder I'd stolen. Natalie was quiet for a moment. "Can you get to the county courthouse when it opens at 8 a.m.? She asked. "I can file an emergency petition electronically within the hour. But you also need to secure your finances immediately. Can you get to your bank?" "I can get there," I said, "but Justina's name is on the account now. They require a cosigner." "I'll handle that," Natalie said, her voice steel. "I'll draft an emergency affidavit, file it with the court, and transmit it directly to your bank's legal department before they open. It will temporarily freeze Justina's access and restore your sole control until the hearing. The bank will have legal cover to process the transaction, but you need to be there the moment they open at 9 a.m. with identification and the court documentation." "I'll be there," I promised. "Good. Stay safe, Becky, and stay away from your house." Jane made me breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, but I couldn't taste it. At 6 a.m., my phone buzzed violently against the kitchen table, making us both jump. It was Mrs. Kowalski. I stared at the screen, my hand hovering over it. I wanted to answer, but paranoia seized my chest. If I pick up, can they track the signal? Can they hear the background noise? I let it ring until it went to voicemail. A moment later, the screen lit up again. A text message from Mrs. Kowalski. "Police are at your house, Becky. Justina is outside in her bathrobe, crying fake tears. She's telling them you wandered off in the night due to confusion. Keep safe and stay hidden." We watched through Jane's front window as more police arrived down the street. Ramona was putting on a performance, gesturing wildly and wiping tears. Paige emerged with her phone, probably showing officers whatever false evidence they'd prepared. They were issuing a silver alert, and soon Arne, the whole city would be looking for a confused elderly woman who had gone missing. "Are you scared?" Jane asked. "I'm terrified," I said, "but I'm done running." At 7:30 a.m., Jane's email pinged. It was Natalie's documents. an emergency petition, a court order stamped by a judge, and a bank affidavit. Jane printed everything, put it in a folder, and handed it to me. At 8 a.m., we left for the courthouse. Jane drove, taking back roads and parking 2 blocks away to avoid being seen. We walked through the morning cold, my ankle throbbing with every step, and the folder of evidence clutched against my chest like a shield. Inside the courthouse, we went to the clerk's office, and I showed them Natalie's electronic filing confirmation. They verified everything, gave me certified copies, told me a judge had already signed the emergency order, and that Justina would be served with a temporary restraining order by noon. The clerk asked if I was safe. "I'm working on it," I said. At 8:45, we headed to the bank. First National didn't open until 9, but we could see Paige's car already in the parking lot. She was sitting there, waiting and watching. She knew I would come for the money. Jane parked on the opposite side of the lot, behind a delivery truck. "We wait until the guard unlocks the door," she said. "Then we run." At exactly 9 a.m., the security guard turned the key. "Go," Jane said. "Go." I limped as fast as I could, with Jane half carrying me along. We managed to burst through the doors just as Paige spotted us and started her car. Brittany was already at her desk and looked up in surprise. "I need to speak to the manager immediately," I said, slamming the court documents on her desk. "Right now." Behind me, through the glass doors, I could see Paige running across the parking lot, her face twisted in rage. The manager appeared, a middle-aged man in a gray suit, and I thrust the folder at him. He started reading the emergency court order, the affidavit of fraud, and the attorney documentation. At that moment, Paige burst through the door. "Stop," she screamed. "She's mentally incompetent. I have medical power of attorney." The manager looked up. He looked at Paige, then at the judge's signature on my paperwork. He turned to the security guard. "Please give us privacy," he said, nodding toward Paige, "and ensure Mrs. Hastings is not disturbed." The guard stepped between Paige and me. "This is fraud," Paige shrieked, pulling out her phone to film. "I'm documenting this. She's not in her right mind. You're letting a confused old woman empty her accounts." "Ma'am," the manager said calmly to me, ignoring her, "this court order restores your sole authority. What would you like to do?" "I want to withdraw everything," I said. "Every dollar right now. Cash up to $10,000 and a cashier's check for the rest." Behind the counter, Brittany was already counting bills, and the printer whirred, spitting out a cashier's check. She handed everything to me in a thick envelope. $347,000. Everything Harold and I had saved in 43 years of marriage. I tucked the envelope into my coat, and the manager walked me to the door while the guard held Paige back. Outside, Jane was waiting with the engine running. I got in, and we peeled out of the lot. In the rearview mirror, I watched Paige burst out of the bank, screaming into her phone. "Where are we going?" Jane asked. "Anywhere but here," I said. "Drive north." We drove out of Richmond and didn't stop until we hit Raleigh, North Carolina, 4 hours later. We found a motel with a flickering neon sign and paid cash. Jane checked us in under her name. It was in that motel room that I finally broke down. I sat on the bed and sobbed, for Harold, for the home I'd lost, and for the family that had turned into predators. Jane held me and told me I'd done it, that I'd fought back and won, but I didn't feel like a winner at all. Instead, I felt like a refugee. Jane's phone rang an hour later. It was Natalie. "The restraining order has been served," she said. "Justina and Paige are barred from contacting you or entering your property, but there's bad news." My heart sank. "What?" "Justina filed a counterpetition this morning," Natalie said. "She's claiming Jane kidnapped you. She alleges that Jane manipulated you into stealing your own money and fleeing across state lines. She claims the court documents were falsified and that you are a vulnerable elder being exploited." The air left the room. "She hired Clayton Burke," Natalie continued. He's one of the most expensive defense attorneys in Virginia, who specializes in turning victims into villains. He's already building a narrative, a concerned sister trying to protect her mentally declining sibling from a predatory friend. Are we going to lose? I asked. No, Natalie said firmly. Not if we fight smarter. I called in a favor. A private investigator named Blake Richardson, based in Norfolk, has agreed to dig into Justina's background. If there is anything, any pattern, or any previous victims, he will find it. We had absolutely no idea that what Blake would find in the next 24 hours would change everything. Not just about what Justina planned for me, but about what she'd already done to Harold. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Harold's face in the hospital. Morning came with Jane's phone ringing. It was Blake Richardson. I dug through public records all night, Blake said, his voice tight. I found something from 2015. In Springfield, Missouri, a man named Thomas Hartley filed a police report against his ex-wife, Justina Parker. Justina's ex-husband. Thomas's mother had died while under Justina's care. Blake continued. The death was ruled natural, heart failure, but Thomas suspected foul play. His mother had been healthy. Then Justina moved in to help during Thomas's work trip. 3 weeks later, his mother was dead and $40,000 was missing from her accounts. However, the investigation went nowhere due to insufficient evidence. Blake paused. I found the death certificate, Becky. Cause of death was cardiac arrest triggered by medication interaction. My vision tunneled. Do you think there's a connection to Harold? Jane asked. Stop, I said, my voice cracking. Harold had a bad heart. Everyone knew that. It was natural. Blake found something else, Jane said gently. He pulled Justina's credit card records. 3 months before Harold died, she bought pharmacology textbooks and nursing reference guides. And her search history? She was searching for medication interactions and cardiac drugs. People search medical things all the time, I insisted, pacing the small room. And this, Blake said, sending a file to Jane's phone. Jane looked at it, her face going pale. She handed it to me. It was security footage from a restaurant in Richmond, dated 3 months before Harold's death. Justina was sitting across from a man in his 60s. Papers were spread between them. The man's face was clear. It was Dr. Morrison, the doctor whose signature was on all those prescriptions, the one whose name Justina had used to get medical power of attorney over me. They met for 2 hours, Blake said. We checked Dr. Morrison's record. He lost his license in 2018 for overprescribing opioids, but he still consults off the books. I stared at the photo. Justina and the disgraced doctor. Planning. I'm going to request Harold's full medical records, Blake said. And the pharmacy logs. No, I whispered. I don't want to know. Becky, Jane said, kneeling in front of me. If she did something, if she hurt him, don't you want justice? I closed my eyes. If Justina had hurt Harold, it meant I had failed him. It meant I had let his killer into our home, let her sit with him, and let her feed him. Do it, I said. Get the records. That night, Jane fell asleep in the other bed, exhausted by the drive and the weight of our discovery. But I lay awake, staring at the water-stained ceiling of the motel room in Raleigh. My phone, or rather, the burner phone Jane had bought me, sat on the nightstand, silent and terrifying. At 3 a.m., exhaustion finally dragged me under, but it wasn't a restful sleep. It was a descent into a nightmare that forced me to confront what I had been refusing to see. I found myself standing in the Richmond Cemetery where we had buried Harold just weeks ago. It was cold and dark, the mist clinging to my ankles like shackles, and Harold's headstone looming in front of me. But something was wrong with it. As I moved closer, fighting against the thick air, I saw that the stone was covered in red spray paint. The words, "Murderer's Widow," dripping down the granite like fresh blood. I tried to wipe it away, scrubbing frantically with my sleeve, but the paint was wet and sticky, staining my hands red. Then I heard a voice behind me. It was Justina's voice, smooth and mocking. You killed him with your weakness, Becky. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs, but she wasn't there. There were just graves stretching endlessly in every direction, a sea of gray stones under a black sky. The voice came again, closer this time, whispering directly into my ear. You let me in. You let me touch him. And you let me feed him those pills while you slept in the chair. I started running, stumbling over the uneven ground. The graves multiplied, rising up like teeth. Every headstone I passed had Harold's name on it, hundreds and thousands of them, all of them accusing me. Justina's laughter echoed from everywhere and nowhere. You should have listened to him. He tried to warn you in 1998, but you chose me over him. You always chose wrong. I fell to my knees in front of one of the stones, clawing at the earth with my bare hands, desperate to reach him, desperate to apologize, and desperate to tell him I knew the truth now. I woke up gasping, tangled in the cheap motel sheets and covered in a cold sweat. Jane was still asleep, her breathing steady and rhythmic, and the room was dark and silent, with the echo of the dream still hanging in the air. You let me feed him those pills while you slept. That horrible dream dragged my memory back to 2024, to Harold's last week alive in the hospital. I remembered the exhaustion that had soaked into my bones, how I had fallen asleep in that uncomfortable vinyl chair beside his bed. I remembered waking up in the dim light to find Justina standing over him and giving him his evening medications, a cup of water, a small paper cup of pills, and her gentle, soothing voice telling him to swallow. I had been so grateful. I had smiled at her, thanked her for letting me rest, and gone back to sleep. But Harold had looked steadily at me over Justina's shoulder. His eyes had been wide and urgent, trying to communicate something his failing voice couldn't form. His mouth had moved, shaping a word I couldn't understand then, but Justina had shushed him, stroking his forehead. You're fine, Harry, she had said. Just sleep. He died 36 hours later. I sat there on the edge of the bed in that dark motel room in North Carolina, my whole body turning to ice. What if the dream wasn't just a nightmare? What if it was a memory I had suppressed? What if Harold had been trying to tell me that Justina was killing him, and I had smiled at his murderer and thanked her for her kindness? I pulled my knees to my chest and pressed my face against them to stifle a sob. If that was true, if Justina had systematically poisoned him right in front of me while I slept, how on earth was I supposed to live with that? How was I supposed to wake up every morning knowing I had watched my husband's execution and called it mercy? At exactly 6 a.m., the text buzzed, glowing bright in the dim room. Landing in Raleigh, Durham at 9:30. Where are you staying? It was Charlotte, my daughter, my firstborn. I had powered down my own phone hours ago, terrified that Justina might be tracking the GPS or reading my messages, and had called Charlotte from Jane's number the second we left the bank. I stared at Jane's phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely type the motel address. My children were coming. Charlotte was coming, and she was bringing Benjamin, my son who lived in London. For the first time in days, I felt something like hope fluttering in my chest. They would see the evidence, the bank records, and the forged signatures. They would help me fight. Jane woke up and made coffee in the tiny machine by the sink, trying to get me to eat toast, but I couldn't swallow it. My stomach was twisted in knots, the good kind for once. By 9 a.m., I changed clothes 3 times, settling on a simple blue sweater Charlotte had given me 2 Christmases ago. I wanted her to remember that I was still her mother, still the woman who raised her, and not the confused geriatric Justina was painting me to be. Jane drove us to the airport. I couldn't sit still in the passenger seat. I kept checking my reflection in the visor mirror, smoothing my hair, and wondering if I looked old or broken. We waited outside baggage claim, the humidity of the North Carolina morning clinging to us. Then I saw them. Charlotte emerged first, tall and polished in her Seattle business casual, pulling a sleek carry-on bag. She looked exhausted, her eyes scanning the crowd frantically until she landed on me. Behind her was Benjamin. He looked older than I remembered, his face drawn and tired, his jaw set in a way that reminded me painfully of Harold. I started toward them, my arms outstretched, ready to collapse into them. Charlotte's hug was brief and stiff. She pulled back quickly, holding me at arm's length and studying my face like I was a stranger or a patient. Benjamin didn't hug me at all. He just stood there, gripping the handle of his suitcase, and nodded once. "Mom," he said. His voice was flat. The hope in my chest turned to ice. Something was wrong. I could see it in the way they looked at Jane, then at the motel behind us, then back at me. Like they didn't see a survivor, they saw a runaway. We drove to a diner near the airport because I didn't want them to see the inside of the motel room just yet. The silence in the car was suffocating and heavy with things unsaid. Inside, we took a corner booth. I sat across from my children, with Jane beside me like a bodyguard. Benjamin ordered black coffee, he didn't drink, and Charlotte picked at a muffin, tearing it into tiny pieces. "You have to listen to me," I began, my words tumbling over each other in my desperation. "Justina changed the locks. She forged my signature at the bank, and she put Harold's urn in the garage next to the oil cans." Charlotte listened, her expression carefully neutral, while Benjamin stared at his coffee cup as if it held the secrets of the universe. When I finished explaining about the escape and the bank manager, Charlotte reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her eyes were wet. "I believe you, Mom," she said softly. "I never trusted Aunt Justina. She always made me feel cold. We should have been here sooner." Relief flooded through me like a warm wave. They heard me. Then Benjamin spoke. "I've been on the phone with Aunt Justina," he said. His voice was calm, reasonable, and terrifying. "For the past 3 weeks." I froze. "She showed me the documentation, Mom," he continued, ignoring me. "She sent me the psychiatric evaluations from Dr. Morrison, which show that you've been having episodes for months. Paranoia, delusions, accusing neighbors of stealing, and forgetting who people are." "I've never met a Dr. Morrison," I cried, my voice rising. "Those documents are forgeries. Justina created them to steal the estate." Benjamin sighed, a sound of deep frustration. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through a gallery, and turned the screen toward me. There were photos of medical reports on official-looking letterhead, complete with doctors' signatures and dates going back 6 months. There were photos of me taken from a distance, walking down the street looking disheveled or arguing with the bank teller, framed to look like confusion. There were bank statements showing erratic withdrawals that I had never made. And then, the kicker, there were character references. Written statements from neighbors in Richmond, including Mrs. Kowalski, saying I had been acting strangely since the funeral, wandering at night and forgetting names. My own neighbors, people I'd lived next to for decades. Justina had gotten to them and had poisoned the well before I even knew I was thirsty. "She manufactured all of this," Jane cut in, her voice sharp. "Benjamin, look at the dates. Look at the signatures. They're identical. It's a stamp." Benjamin looked up at Jane with barely concealed disgust. "Who are you?" "I'm the woman who saved your mother from being committed to a facility against her will," Jane snapped. "Or," Benjamin said, his voice hardening, "you're the woman who convinced a grieving widow to empty her bank account and flee across state lines. Aunt Justina told me about you, Jane. She said you've been isolating Mom and that you're the one feeding her these conspiracy theories." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. He thought Jane was the villain and that Justina was the hero. "Benjamin, please," I begged, reaching for his hand, but he pulled it away. "Justina isn't trying to help me. She's trying to steal the house. We found the folder. She plans to sell it by July." "Mom, stop," he said, rubbing his temples. "Just listen to yourself. You're accusing your own sister, the woman who drove 8 hours to take care of you, of being a criminal mastermind. Do you know how that sounds? It sounds like paranoia. He leaned forward, his eyes pleading. I love you, Mom. I flew halfway across the world because I love you, but you need help, real professional help, not this. He gestured around the diner, running away to motels and carrying cash in envelopes. Charlotte tried to intervene. Ben, wait. Look at the bank documents Mom has. Look at the forged signature. It doesn't match. You always take her side, Char, Benjamin snapped, turning on his sister. You're enabling this and making it worse. If she hurts herself because we didn't step in, that's on you. They started shouting at each other across the table. My children, tearing each other apart over me. Other diners were staring. I pressed my hands over my ears and squeezed my eyes shut, wanting to disappear, wanting to wake up from this nightmare where my own son looked at me with pity and fear. Jane's arm wrapped around my shoulders, grounding me. When I opened my eyes, Benjamin was standing up. I'm going to Richmond, he announced, throwing cash on the table. I'm going to the house. I'm going to talk to Aunt Justina face to face and get the absolute truth, and I'm going to see these forgeries for myself. No, I screamed, scrambling out of the booth. Benjamin, no. She's dangerous. She's been planning this for months. If you go there, she'll manipulate you. I can handle Aunt Justina, he said dismissively. I'm not a child, Mom. I'll call you when I get there. We're going to fix this. Don't go to her. I grabbed his sleeve. Please, Benny, please. He looked at my hand on his arm, then back at my face. I love you, Mom, and I'm doing this for you. He pulled his arm free and walked out of the diner, with the bell chiming cheerfully above the door. Charlotte ran after him, calling his name, but he didn't look back. He got into a rental car he must have booked from his phone and peeled out of the parking lot, heading north toward Virginia. Toward the house and toward Justina. Back at the motel, I was a wreck. I couldn't stop shaking, and I couldn't stop the tears. Charlotte sat beside me on the bed, her hand on my back, whispering reassurances, but her voice still wavered. I could tell she was scared. Maybe, just maybe, Benjamin had managed to plant a seed of doubt in her too. Jane was pacing the small room, her phone pressed to her ear. She was calling Blake Richardson, the private investigator in Norfolk. We need the records, Jane was saying. Now, Benjamin is driving to the house. We need to show him proof before he gets there. She put the phone on speaker. Blake's voice filled the room, tight with urgency. I got them, Blake said. I got Harold's medical records from the hospital in Richmond, and I cross-referenced them with the pharmacy logs Justina used. And? Charlotte asked. They don't match, Blake said. Someone changed Harold's prescriptions at the pharmacy level 3 months before he died. They switched his maintenance meds for digoxin, high doses. Digoxin? Charlotte frowned. Dad wasn't on digoxin. He had a heart block. Digoxin would kill him. Exactly, Blake said. It would trigger a cardiac arrest that would look exactly like natural heart failure. And the authorization for the prescription change? It was signed by Dr. Morrison, with Justina Parker listed as the caregiver for pickup. The room tilted and the floor seemed to drop out from under me. Blake continued, his voice softening. I had a medical examiner friend look at the toxicology panel from the autopsy, the standard one they run. It was flagged as consistent with medication, so nobody looked closer. But the levels were toxic, Mrs. Hastings. If Harold really took those pills, then his heart didn't just fail, it was stopped. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Jane gripped my shoulders and made me look at her. Becky, listen to me. She murdered him. Not possibly. Not maybe. Definitely. The denial I'd been clinging to, that last desperate hope that Justina was just greedy and cruel, shattered like glass. She had researched how to kill him, planned it for months, changed his medications, and fed him pills that slowly destroyed his failing heart. And I had thanked her for helping. I had let her sit with him, hold his hand, and adjust his pillows. I had let her give him water and medication while I slept in that hospital chair, exhausted and trusting. I had watched her kill my husband and smiled at her while she did it. The scream that came out of me didn't sound human. It was a raw, animal sound of agony. Charlotte wrapped her arms around me, trying to hold me together while I broke into pieces she couldn't catch. "We have to call Benjamin," Charlotte yelled, grabbing her phone. "We have to tell him." But as she dialed, a thought hit me like ice water. Justina had killed Harold to get him out of the way. She had killed him to get to the money. And now Benjamin, who was asking questions, who was going to demand to see the records, who was the only male heir to the estate, was driving straight to her. "He's walking into a trap," I whispered. Charlotte's face went white as the call went to voicemail. "He's not picking up." "Check the flight," Jane said to Blake. "Did he fly to Richmond?" "Checking," Blake said, typing sounds. Then a pause. "No, he didn't book a flight to Richmond. He rented a car in Raleigh. He's driving." "That means he's about 2 hours ahead of us," Charlotte said. "He'll be at the house in less than 2 hours," Blake said. "And if Justina knows he's coming, if she knows he's suspicious, she'll do it again," I said. The realization was absolute. Justina had killed once and had gotten away with it. She had $400,000 on the line. She wouldn't let Benjamin ruin it. "We have to go," Jane said, grabbing her keys. "We have to beat him there. It's 3 hours to Richmond," Charlotte cried. "We'll never catch him." "We have to try," I said, standing up, the grief replaced by a cold, hard adrenaline. I lost my husband to that woman. I am not losing my son to her as well. We ran for the car. Jane took the driver's seat. I got in the front and Charlotte in the back. Jane peeled out of the motel parking lot and hit the highway entrance ramp doing 60. My phone, formerly Charlotte's phone, rang as we merged onto I-95. It was an unknown number. My heart stopped, but I answered. It was Justina's voice, smooth, calm, and pleased. "Hello, Becky. I hear you've been telling stories about me." My throat closed. "Benjamin called me from the road," she continued, conversational, as if discussing the weather. "Such a good boy, so concerned about his poor sick mother. He's coming to see me, and we're going to have a nice long talk about your mental state." "Don't you touch him," I choked out. "I know what you did to Harold, and I know about the Goxen." There was a silence, a long, heavy silence. Then Justina laughed. "You should have stayed gone, Becky. You should have taken your money and disappeared. But you had to keep digging. You had to ruin everything." "What are you going to do?" I screamed. "The same thing I did to Harold," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Only this time, you'll be alive to watch." The line went dead. Jane's foot hit the gas, and the speedometer climbed past 90. We were racing north toward a house that had become a slaughterhouse, and praying we weren't driving toward a second funeral. Jane's car screamed down Interstate 95 as the speedometer hovered at 105 miles per hour and the engine whining in protest. Every mile marker that flashed past felt like a countdown clock, and every slow-moving semi-truck we had to swerve around felt like an obstacle placed there by fate to slow us down. Charlotte kept calling Benjamin, hitting redial, listening to the ring, getting the voicemail, hanging up, and doing it all over again. "Pick up, pick up, pick up," she whispered, her thumb hovering over the screen. I gripped the door handle so hard my knuckles ached, and staring at the gray ribbon of highway stretching north. Blake called again on speakerphone. "I reached out to Richmond PD," he said, his voice cutting through the road noise. "I explained the situation and told them we have a homicide suspect potentially holding a hostage." "Are they sending a car?" I asked. "They said without proof of immediate harm or a warrant, they can't enter private property based on a phone call from a private investigator. The restraining order violation is a civil matter, and that they would send an officer to do a welfare check when one becomes available." "When one becomes available," I shouted. "My son could be dead by then." I know, Blake said. I'm driving too. I'm about 40 minutes out. I'm going to the house myself. Be careful, Jane said. She's not rational, Blake. I thought about Harold's last moments again. Had he known what was happening? Had he felt his heart struggling and fluttering like a trapped bird? Had he been afraid? Had he called for me in the dark while I slept 3 feet away? The guilt was a physical weight in my chest, heavier than gravity. Charlotte's voice broke through my spiral. I left another message, she said, her voice raw. I told him to leave the house, not to eat or drink anything, and to run. My phone buzzed in my lap. It was a text from an unknown number. I picked it up, with more dread pooling in my stomach, as a photo loaded slowly on the screen. It was Benjamin. He was sitting at my kitchen table in Richmond and looking tired. His jacket was off and his tie loosened. Across from him sat Justina, smiling that warm and sisterly smile. In front of Benjamin was a steaming mug of coffee. My Heary flipped. Below the photo, Justina had written, "He drinks his coffee black, just like his father did." I couldn't scream. I couldn't breathe. I just showed Jane and Charlotte the photo. Charlotte went white. Jane's jaw clenched and she pushed the accelerator harder, weaving through the traffic. Soon another text came from Justina. "Don't worry, we're just talking. He's hearing all about his poor sick mother, so understanding and so concerned. Such a good son. It's a shame." I typed back with shaking fingers, hitting the wrong keys before correcting them. "Please, he has nothing to do with this. Let him go. Take the house. Take the money. Just let him go." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "He has everything to do with this. He's Harold's son. Your son. He's the proof that you had a life I never got. He's everything you don't deserve." Then the dots again. "Did you know Harold tried to warn me away once? In 1998? He told me to stay away from you. Said I was toxic. He actually used that word, toxic, as he tried to cut me out." My chest constricted further. I remembered that conversation. It was in the kitchen late at night. Harold had refused to give Justina more money for one of her schemes. He told her she wasn't welcome in our home anymore if she was just going to keep using us. He had told her she was dangerous. Justina had cried, apologized, and had sworn that she would change. And I had begged him. "She's my sister, Harold. She has no one else." I had talked him down and invited the vampire back over the threshold. Another text came in. I should have ended him then. Would have saved myself years of watching him touch you, kiss you, and choose you, every single time. Charlotte read the text over my shoulder. "She's confessing," she whispered. "She's confessing because she thinks we can't stop her." "She thinks she's won," Jane said grimly. "What are we going to do?" Charlotte asked. "We drive," I said. "We keep driving." Blake called again. "I'm with the DA's office on the other line," he said. "They are filing emergency charges based on the toxicology report mismatch. Murder, elder abuse, fraud. The warrants are being processed, but warrants take time, and judges have to sign them." "We don't have time," I said. "I know," Blake said. "I'm 20 minutes out. I'm going in." "Wait for us," Jane said. "Do not go in alone." "If I see him drink that coffee," Blake said, "I'm kicking the door down." I looked at the photo again, the steam rising from the cup. I typed to Justina, "What did you put in it?" The response came immediately, terrifyingly fast. "The same cocktail I gave Harold, digoxin and a beta blocker. It starts with confusion, then the chest pain sets in. By the time the ambulance gets there, it looks exactly like a massive coronary. Natural causes, especially with his family history." Charlotte screamed as she read the text. "Ben?" she yelled at her phone, dialing him again. "Pick up! Pick up!" I called him too, straight to voicemail. Charlotte left a frantic message, sobbing into the phone. "Ben, don't drink the coffee. Don't drink anything she gives you. Get out of the house. She killed Dad. She's trying to kill you." But he wasn't listening to his voicemail. He was probably still sitting at that kitchen table, listening to his aunt's soft voice, believing her lies about his confused mother, and reaching for the warm cup to comfort himself. How long had it been since the photo was sent? 5 minutes? 10? Had he taken a sip yet? I thought about Harold, about the night he died, and I remembered him complaining of nausea earlier in the evening. I remembered him saying his chest felt heavy. I had thought it was the surgery recovery. Justina had also told me it was a normal side effects. She had sat there and watched him die, if possible timed it as well. The Richmond exit loomed ahead. Jane didn't hesitate. She took the off-ramp at 70, with the tires screeching and the car tilting dangerously. We tore through the suburban streets I knew by heart. We passed the grocery store where I shopped, the park where Benjamin used to play baseball, and Mrs. Kowalski's house. My street appeared. Jane didn't bother slowing down for the driveway. She jumped the curb and slammed to a stop on my front lawn, tearing up the grass Harold had loved so much. Then we ran. The front door was unlocked, and so we burst through, with Charlotte screaming Benjamin's name. But the house was silent. Too silent. The air conditioning was humming, a normal sound that felt obscene in the stillness. "Benjamin!" I screamed. We ran toward the kitchen, and then I saw him. Benjamin was slumped in the chair at the table. His head was resting on the wood, and his arms dangling at his sides. The coffee cup was overturned, with a dark puddle spreading across the table and dripping onto the floor. "No!" Charlotte shrieked, as she grabbed him, shaking his shoulders. "Ben! Ben!" He didn't move. He was heavy, dead weight. Jane was already on the phone with 911, giving the address, and screaming that we needed an ambulance immediately for a poisoning. I stood frozen in the doorway. My son, my baby boy, not moving. This couldn't be happening. Not again. Not him too. I couldn't survive this twice. Charlotte slapped his face. "Wake up, Benjamin! Wake up!" I forced myself forward and touched his neck. His skin was still warm. I pressed my fingers to his pulse point. It was there. Rapid, thready, and irregular. But it was there. "He's alive!" I cried. "He's alive! Justina!" Jane yelled, looking around. "Where is she?" The back door stood open, swaying slightly in the breeze. She had run. She had poisoned her own nephew and run like a coward while he died. Benjamin's eyes fluttered, then opened slightly, unfocused and glassy. He tried to lift his head, but couldn't. His lips moved, forming words that were just a slur. "Mom," I grabbed his hand. "I'm here, baby, I'm here." She said. He tried to swallow, then gagged. His body seized up, his back arching. "He's seizing," Charlotte yelled. Roll him on his side." We pulled him out of the chair onto the floor. I held his head while his body shook violently as foam gathered at the corners of his mouth. "Hold on," I whispered, stroking his hair with my tears temporarily blinding me. "Hold on, Benny. Please don't leave me." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Blake ran through the front door, his gun drawn. He saw us on the floor and holstered it immediately, dropping to his knees beside Benjamin. "Paramedics are 2 minutes out," he said, checking Benjamin's eyes. "Pinpoint pupils, rapid heart rate. It's toxicity." "She gave him digoxin," I said. "She told me." Blake nodded. "I'll tell the EMTs." The paramedics burst through the door seconds later. They were professional and efficient and pushed us aside to work on him. They started an IV and pushed drugs as they loaded him onto a stretcher. "We're going to VCU Medical," the lead paramedic said. "You can follow, but you can't ride." They wheeled him out and Charlotte ran after them. I stood up, my knees shaking. I looked at the overturned coffee cup and I looked at the open back door. Justina was out there. She was free. She was dangerous. And she wasn't done. Blake was already on his phone with the police dispatch. "Suspect is Justina Parker. Female, white, in her 70s, and dangerous. She has fled the scene." "She took my car," I said, realizing my keys were gone from the hook by the door. "My Ford. It was parked in the driveway." Blake relayed the vehicle description. Jane put her hand on my arm. "Becky, we need to go to the hospital." "No," I said. The word came out hard, surprising even me. "Charlotte is with him. He's in good hands." "What are you doing?" Jane asked. "I'm going to find her." I said. She doesn't get to run away. Not this time. The police will find her, Blake said. She's smart, Blake. She'll ditch the car and will have a second vehicle stashed. She plans these things. I looked at him. She told me she's going to the lake house. What lake house? Our mother's old property, I said. It's 2 hours north, isolated, with no neighbors. Justina inherited it. It's where she goes when she wants to hide. My phone buzzed again. It was Justina. He's going to die, Becky, just like Harold. And you'll watch another person you love slip away, knowing you're the reason he's gone, knowing your weakness killed him. I stared at the screen. I could have had a good life, she texted again. But you were always there, always in the way. Mom loved you more. Dad protected you. Harold chose you. Everyone always chose you. So I'm taking everything you love, one piece at a time, until there's nothing left but you and me. She's baiting you, Blake said, reading over my shoulder. She wants you to come to her. Then I'll go, I said. She might have a weapon, Jane warned. She is the weapon, I said. And I'm the only one who can stop her. Another text and a photo. It was the lake house, lit up against the darkening sky. Are you coming? I'm waiting. We should finish this. Just you and me, the way it should have been from the start. I typed back, I'm coming. Her response, good. Let's see who Mom's favorite really is now. Blake sighed, checking his gun. I'm driving, he said. And we are not going alone. I'm calling the state troopers to meet us there. We piled into Jane's car because mine was gone. Then we drove north into the darkness out, leaving the lights of Richmond behind. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was past fear and past grief. Instead, I was filled with a cold and clear purpose. Justina had taken my husband, had tried to take my son, and had tried to take my mind. Tonight, she was going to take nothing else. The lake house was north of Richmond, deep in the rural county where the streetlights end and the trees crowd the road like silent sentinels. It was a property our mother had left to Justina years ago, a place I had only visited once to sign the estate paperwork, and now it sat in my memory as a dark, rotting tooth on the edge of black water. Jane was the one driving now, her eyes fixed on the winding road, while Blake sat in the passenger seat, checking the clip of his firearm with a metallic click-clack that sounded too loud in the enclosed space. I sat in the back, clutching my burner phone. Charlotte had stayed behind at VCU Medical Center to be with Benjamin, but she was texting me updates every 5 minutes. He's in the ICU, the last text read. Doctors are flushing his system. They say the next hour is critical. Mom, please be careful. I stared out the window at the passing woods. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was hollowed out. Justina had taken my husband, poisoned my son, and had stolen my grief. There was nothing left for her to take, which meant I had nothing left to lose. My phone buzzed again. It was Justina. I can see your headlights, Becky, the text read. You always did drive too slow. She was watching. She was waiting. She knows we're here, I told Blake. Good, he said, his voice grim. That means she won't be surprised when we kick the door in. I already called the state police, but they are 20 minutes out. We can't wait for them. The lake house appeared in the distance, a small, run-down structure with peeling paint and a porch light glowing like a malicious yellow eye in the darkness. Blake told Jane to kill the headlights a quarter-mile back, and we rolled to a stop on the gravel shoulder, with the silence of the woods descending on us instantly. Stay behind me, Blake ordered as we got out. If she has a weapon, you drop to the ground. Do you understand? I understand, I said, though I knew that if she had a weapon, I wouldn't be dropping. I would be walking straight toward it. We moved toward the house, with the gravel crunching softly under our feet and the air smelling of pine needles and damp earth. The front door stood wide open, a rectangle of light spilling out onto the porch like an invitation into the belly of the beast. Justina's voice drifted out, conversational and calm, as if she were hosting a tea party rather than a murder scene. Come in, Becky, she called out. I put the kettle on. I figured you'd need something to calm your nerves. Blake went in first, his gun raised, sweeping the front room with professional efficiency. It was empty, filled only with dust sheets draped over old furniture like ghosts. I followed him, with Jane close behind me gripping a heavy flashlight like a club. In here, Justina called from the back room, the sunroom that overlooked the black expanse of the lake. I walked toward the voice. Blake tried to stop me with a hand signal, but I pushed past him. I needed to see her. Justina stood by the window, silhouetted against the moonlight reflecting off the water. She turned as I entered, a porcelain teacup in her hand, wearing a silk robe I recognized. It was mine. She must have stolen it from my closet before she fled. "Hello, sister," she said, smiling that same smile she used when we were children, the one that meant she had broken something precious of mine and was waiting for me to find it. "You look terrible," she said. "Grief really does age a person." "Where is the poison?" I asked, my voice steady. "The digoxin. Did you leave any for yourself?" Justina laughed, a tinkling sound that bounced off the glass walls. "Why would I do that? I'm not the one who's going to die tonight. I'm the survivor, Becky. I've always been the survivor." Blake stepped into the room, his gun trained on her center mass. "Put your hands where I can see them, Mrs. Parker." Justina didn't even flinch. She took a sip of tea. "Or what? You'll shoot an unarmed old woman in her bathrobe? I know who you are. You're the cheap shamus who handled the Miller divorce last year. You're a private investigator, Mr. Richardson, not a cop. If you pull that trigger, you go to prison for murder, and I become the victim. Again." She looked at me. "That's the narrative, isn't it? Poor Justina. Her sister went crazy with grief, accused her of terrible things, and then sent a hired thug to kill her. The jury will love me." "They won't love you when they see the medical records," I said. "We know about the pharmacy, Justina. And we know about Dr. Morrison. We know you changed Harold's meds 3 months before he died." Her smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second, before reassembling itself into a sneer. "Harold," she spat the name. "He was weak. His heart was failing anyway. I just accelerated the timeline. I did you a favor, really. You were spending all your time nursing him. You were practically wasting away your life." "You killed him for money," I said, stepping closer. "I killed him because he was in the way," she shouted, her composure cracking. "He stood between us. He always stood between us. Before him, it was just you and me against the world. Then he came along with his steady job and his boring promises, and you chose him. You abandoned me." "I got married, Justina. I didn't abandon you. You left me," she screamed, throwing the teacup against the wall. It shattered, with shards of china exploding outward. "You had the perfect house, the perfect husband, and the perfect children. And what did I have? Nothing. Scraps. Hand-me-downs. You looked at me with pity your whole life, Becky. Poor Justina. Poor divorced Justina. But guess what? I hated your pity more than I hated your happiness." She was advancing on me now, her eyes wild. Blake shifted, ready to fire, but I held up a hand to stop him. I needed to hear this. I needed to know. "So you decided to take it," I said. "You decided that if you couldn't have my life, you would destroy it." "I decided to balance the scales," she hissed. "I took Harold. I was going to take the house, and Benjamin, well, Benjamin was just a bonus. He was so arrogant, coming into the kitchen like that, and demanding answers. He looked just like his father. It was almost satisfying to watch the light go out of his eyes." The room went silent. "You admit it," I whispered. "You admit you poisoned Benjamin." "Of course I did," she said, smoothing her robe. "And he's dead by now, which means you have nothing left, Becky. No husband, no son, just a big empty house and a sister who is the only person left who understands you." She smiled again, a terrifying and twisted expression of love. "We can be together now, just us, like when we were girls. I'll take care of you." I looked at her and I finally saw her clearly. She wasn't just a thief. She wasn't just a killer. She was a void. a black hole of need and jealousy that had consumed everything I loved. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen was glowing. "Benjamin isn't dead," I said. Justina froze. "Charlotte just texted me," I lied, or maybe I hoped. "The doctor stabilized him. He's awake. He told the police everything you gave him, and this." I held up the phone. "This call has been connected to 911 for the last 5 minutes. The dispatcher heard every word you just said." Justina's face went white. She looked at the phone, then at Blake's gun, then at the window behind her. The reality of her situation crashed down on her. The narrative she had built, the grieving sister, the victim, was gone. She had confessed to murder on a recorded line. "No," she whispered. "No, you're lying. You're always lying." "I'm done lying, Justina, and I'm done protecting you." A siren wailed in the distance, cutting through the woods, then another. Blue lights flickered against the trees outside, getting brighter and getting closer. Justina looked at the window. For a second, I thought she might jump, might try to run into the lake and disappear. But instead, she lunged at me. It happened so fast, Blake couldn't shoot. She threw herself at me with a primal scream, her hands reaching for my throat, her fingernails like claws. "You ruined everything," she shrieked. I didn't step back. I didn't cower. I stepped forward and caught her wrists in my hands. Hands made strong by 30 years of lifting heavy boxes of books, and hands made strong by caring for a dying husband. I gripped her wrists and shoved her back with every ounce of rage I had stored up for 40 years. "Get off me," I screamed. Justina stumbled back. Her heel caught on the edge of the rug. She flailed, her arms wheeling, and she fell hard against the antique writing desk in the corner. She hit the ground in a heap of silk and fury. She tried to scramble up, but Blake was already there, his boot on her shoulder, pinning her to the floor. "Stay down," he shouted. "Do not move." Justina looked up at me from the floor. Her hair was wild, her lip was bleeding, and her eyes were filled with a hatred so pure it felt like heat. "I should have killed you first," she spat. "I should have put the pills in your tea." I looked down at my sister, the girl I had shared a room with, the woman I had invited into my home, the monster who had murdered my husband. "You tried," I said softly, "but you missed." The police burst through the door seconds later, with their weapons drawn. They swarmed the room, pulling Justina up and cuffing her hands behind her back. As they dragged her out, she didn't scream anymore. She just stared at me, her eyes locking onto mine, trying to plant one last seed of fear. "You'll be alone, Becky," she shouted as they pushed her into the cruiser. "You'll die alone in that big house. You need me." I stood on the porch and watched the red taillights fade into the darkness, taking my sister away forever. Jane came up beside me and wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. "It's over," she said. My phone buzzed. It was Charlotte. "He's okay. He's awake, and he's asking for you." I sank down onto the porch steps, and finally, for the first time since Harold died, I cried. Not tears of grief, but tears of release. The poison was gone. The house was clean. We drove to VCU Medical Center in silence, the dawn breaking over Richmond in streaks of pink and gold that felt too cheerful for the night we had just survived. When we arrived, the hospital smelled of antiseptic and coffee, a scent that triggered a visceral memory of the nights I had spent watching Harold fade away. But this time, the outcome was different. They led us to the ICU, where Benjamin lay in a bed surrounded by monitors that beeped with a steady and reassuring rhythm. He looked so young and so pale, with an IV in his arm and oxygen tubes in his nose, but his chest was rising and falling with a strength that Harold had lost long before the end. His eyes opened when he heard us enter, and they found me immediately. "Mom," his voice was rough, scraping against the silence of the room. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I rushed to the bedside and grabbed his hand, pressing it against my cheek. "There is nothing to forgive," I whispered, tears finally spilling over. "You are alive, Benny. You are alive, and that is the only thing that matters. He started to cry then, deep, racking sobs that shook the bed rails. I should have believed you, he choked out. I was so stupid and so arrogant. I thought I knew better, and I almost got myself killed because I trusted the wrong person. We all did, I told him, smoothing the hair back from his forehead. Justina spent decades perfecting her lies, and we were just the audience she performed for. Charlotte sat on the other side of his bed, and for a moment it was just the three of us, broken, battered, but breathing. Is she? Benjamin hesitated, afraid to ask. Is she gone? She's arrested, I said, and the words felt like a physical weight lifting off my shoulders. Charlotte recorded her confession, and Blake and Jane were there as witnesses. She will go to prison for what she did to your father and for what she tried to do to you. He was quiet for a long time, staring at the ceiling tiles, before he asked the question I knew was coming, the question I had been avoiding in the dark corners of my own mind. Do you think Dad knew? He asked softly. At the end? Do you think he understood what was happening? I thought about Harold's last conscious moments, his eyes wide and desperate, trying to tell me something while his voice failed him. I thought about the way his mouth had formed the shape of her name. Yes, I said, my voice trembling. I think Harold knew. I think he tried to warn me, and I think his last act on this earth was trying to protect me from the sister I refused to see clearly. Benjamin squeezed my hand, his grip weak but present. It wasn't your fault, Mom. She fooled everyone. But I was the one who opened the door, I said, and I will carry that forever. The weeks that followed blurred together into a haze of legal depositions and police interviews. The district attorney prosecuted the case with a ferocity that matched my own, using Charlotte's recording as the centerpiece of the evidence. Justina tried to claim temporary insanity, painting herself as a grieving sister who had snapped under the pressure of caretaking. But the jury didn't buy it. They didn't buy it because we had Thomas Hartley. Thomas, Justina's ex-husband, flew in from Springfield to testify. He sat on the stand, a man broken by years of guilt, and told the story of his mother's suspicious death. How Justina had been there, how the money had disappeared, and how he had suspected her for years but couldn't prove it until now. Then came Paige. My niece took a plea deal, trading her mother's secrets for a 5-year sentence for conspiracy and fraud. She cried on the stand, looking small and young, saying her mother had groomed her from childhood to see manipulation as a survival skill. She said she was sorry and that she wished she'd been strong enough to stop it. I almost believed her, but then I remembered her laughing in my kitchen about committing me, and I looked away. The verdict came on a rainy Tuesday in November, guilty on all counts. First-degree murder, attempted murder, elder abuse, and fraud. The judge sentenced her to life without the possibility of parole. Justina stood in that courtroom, wearing a gray prison jumpsuit that washed out her complexion, and stared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. There was no remorse in her eyes and no apology on her lips. As the bailiffs led her away, she screamed at me, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "This is your fault, Becky. You ruined my life. You stole everything from me." The bailiff silenced her, and the heavy courtroom doors swung shut, stealing her away like a monster in a tomb. And it was over. Except it wasn't. Not really. Because Justina was right about one thing. The guilt did eat at me. Every night I thought about Harold, about the moments I'd missed, about the warnings I'd ignored, and about the fact that my kindness had been the weapon she used to kill him. I couldn't stay in Richmond. I sold the house because there were too many ghosts in the hallways and too many memories of Justina, touching things, sitting in chairs, and breathing the air that should have been Harold's alone. I found a small cottage in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, right by the ocean, where the waves were loud enough to drown out my thoughts. Jane moved into the guest house because she wouldn't let me be alone, and we started a new life of quiet mornings and long walks on the sand. 3 months after the trial, I was unpacking the last few boxes from Richmond when I found something wedged behind the bookshelf in Harold's old greenhouse crate. It was an envelope, sealed with tape, with my name written in Harold's shaky and distinct handwriting. My hands shook so badly I had to sit on the floor to open it. Inside was a letter dated 1 week before he died. "My dearest Becky," it read, "if you're reading this now, something has happened to me. I hope I'm being paranoid, and I hope you find this letter years from now and laugh at my worries while we drink coffee on the porch. But I need to write this down, just in case. Your sister has been asking questions about my medications, about my will, and about our assets. She's been visiting more frequently and being more helpful than usual, but her eyes don't match her smile. It makes me uneasy. I don't trust her, Becky. I've never trusted her. I know you love her. She's your sister. But there is something wrong with Justina. There always has been. She looks at us like we are things to be owned and not people to be loved. I've updated my will. Everything goes to you. I've opened an account in a bank in Raleigh under your maiden name with enough money to take care of yourself if anything happens to the main accounts. The key to the safety deposit box is taped behind our wedding photo. Watch her, Becky. Be careful. Don't trust her alone with your medications or your finances. And if something does happen to me, know that every moment with you was worth it. You were my whole world, my greatest joy, and my best decision. Don't ever let anyone make you doubt yourself. You are stronger than you know. I love you. Always. Harold." I read it 3 times, then 4, my tears soaking the paper. He had known. He had suspected her, and he had tried to protect me even from beyond the grave by setting up a safety net in Raleigh, because he knew I might need to run. I stood up and placed the letter on the table next to Harold's urn, which I had buckled into the front seat of Jane's car the night we fled Richmond. He was with me now, safe, watching the ocean he had always loved. I took the letter to the beach and sat on the sand, the gray Atlantic waves crashing around me, and I read it again. Jane found me there an hour later. She sat beside me and didn't say anything. She just wrapped her cardigan around my shoulders and held my hand while I cried for the husband who had loved me enough to plan for his own murder. "He tried to save me," I whispered. "He did everything right." "He did," Jane said. "And he succeeded. You're here, Becky. You're alive." I asked Jane if the guilt would ever stop, if I'd ever forgive myself for not seeing what was right in front of me. Jane looked out at the horizon. "Maybe forgiveness isn't the goal," she said. "Maybe the goal is learning to live with the scar and honoring Harold's memory by building a life that Justina couldn't destroy." I looked at the letter in my hands, at the words, "I love you always," and I decided that Jane was right. I folded the letter carefully and put it in a glass bottle I'd brought from the cottage, sealing it with wax to keep it safe. I walked to the edge of the water, the foam rushing over my bare feet, and I held the bottle to my heart one last time. "I'm sorry, Harold," I whispered to the wind. "I miss you, and I will spend the rest of my life honoring what we had." I threw the bottle into the ocean as hard as I could and watched it bob in the surf, catching the current and floating away to wherever Harold was now. Jane joined me at the water's edge, linking her arm through mine. "You got your justice," she said. I shook my head, watching the bottle disappear. "No, I got my life back." We stood there as the sun set over the Atlantic, 2 old women who'd survived the worst and were still standing. Behind us, the cottage waited, warm and safe. Tomorrow, Charlotte would call from Seattle and Benjamin would text from London, and life would continue its messy, complicated, and beautiful march forward. Justina was in a cell in Greensville, and she would die there. Her manipulation couldn't reach me anymore. But more importantly, I'd learned something Harold had tried to teach me years ago. Not all family deserves your trust. Not all blood means loyalty. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away from the people who want to destroy you. I had walked away, finally. Too late to save Harold, but not too late to save myself. A laugh bubbled up in my throat, surprising me. Jane looked over, concerned. I just realized something, I told her. That despite everything she took, she failed in the one way that mattered. How? She tried to break me. She tried to leave me with nothing. But I'm still here. I'm still breathing, and I am still capable of joy. Harold's love hadn't died with him. Charlotte and Benjamin were closer to me now than they'd been in years, united by the trauma we had survived. And Jane? Jane had become family in the truest sense, proving that blood isn't what binds us. Loyalty is. We walked back to the cottage as twilight settled, the smell of salt air filling my lungs. Tomorrow I would plant flowers in the sandy soil. Maybe I would start painting again. I would make dinner with Jane, and we would drink wine and talk about the future. I would live the life Harold had wanted me to have, the life Justina had tried to steal but couldn't. Because in the end, she'd been wrong about one fundamental thing. It wasn't weakness that had once threatened to destroy me. It was love. And it was love that ultimately saved me. Now listen to me. If you are in this situation right now, if someone is erasing you, manipulating everyone around you, and making you question your own sanity, you are not crazy. They are just that good at what they do. Here's what saved my life, and here's what can save yours. Document everything. Every conversation, every transaction, and every lie. Your memory isn't enough when they're gaslighting an entire community. Find one person who believes you. Just one. I had Jane. Without her, I wouldn't have made it. That one believer becomes your anchor when everyone else thinks you're losing your mind. And trust your gut. You know something's wrong even when you can't prove it yet. Harold tried to tell me, and my instincts screamed at me, but I ignored both because I wanted to believe family meant safety. The question isn't whether you'll believe family over your instincts. The question is, how much will you lose before you finally trust yourself? Don't let it be everything. This is Becky Hastings, signing off from the coast of North Carolina. The tide is coming in, the air is clean, and for the first time in a long time, I am not afraid of the dark. You've made it to the end. You walked through the fire with Becky. But I have to be honest. It breaks my heart when I see people listen to these stories, feel these heavy emotions, and then just walk away. No subscription, no support, just silence. It feels like I'm pouring my soul into a void, working days and nights to bring these voices to life, only to be met with ghost viewers. Please, don't be another ghost. If this story kept you company, don't just take it and leave. You owe it to the story to leave a mark. A subscribe, a super thanks, or even just commenting your city. Tell me where in the world you are listening from. Let me know exactly where my voice is traveling so I know I'm not alone in this. And if you aren't ready to leave yet, don't. There are 2 more real-life journeys right here on your screen. Pick one. Stay with me a little longer. Don't let the silence win. Until next time.